Hi, folks. Steven here. So, this is going to be another one of our live streams. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the music of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity for the 3DS. This is it depends if you count those Japan only WiiWare ones, but really the third Mystery Dungeon. Well, it's weird because there's only one of them this time and stuff like that. But as usual, I have Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And Anne, why don't you do a little bit of an introduction there?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Anne. I run Pikapi Podcast. I love to talk about the Pokemon anime. That's the bend that I come at things. And on my show, we go through every episode of the Pokemon anime from start to finish and talk about everybody's character arcs and their feelings and debate Pokemon science and just get very nerdy about things, maybe more so than the creators ever intended.
Yeah. So, what have you put any new episodes out recently?
Unfortunately, no. The last episode I was working on was actually from Pokemon Chronicles. It's a Gary centric episode, and that ended up being a monster because Gary is the gift that keeps on giving. Every time he shows up, there's a lot to talk about, and then we also got the Pokemon fossils and the conundrum and just general mess that is that. So it actually took me a long time to make notes, a long time to record, and it's taking a longer time to edit. But I'm hoping it's up soon because that one's going to be good.
Is this the Gary Aerodactyl one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I definitely remember that one. So, Gary, a very interesting and character who goes through a lot of stuff over the course of the series. So,
Yes, he
that'll be
does.
interesting to see. As far as on my end, I guess I should summarize. Earlier this week, I did another live stream. Last weekend, I was over at the North American Internationals, but rather than playing in one of the main events that I'm thoroughly mediocre in, I decided to, as usual, do a bunch of side event stuff. Actually, had a lot of fun there. Met a lot of nice folks. Am working on one written interview that I hope to have up soon-ish. Can't say exactly when that will be, but hopefully that will be relatively soon. We don't have a proper pre-show here for this time around, although there may be some AI-generated imagery later in the presentation. So instead, I think we're going to go ahead. Remember, if you have any thoughts on the game, or its music, go ahead and type those in. If you're watching this on replay, go ahead and type those in. If you get them in live here, we'll try to work them into the discussion. If you get them in a comment, we'll try to work them into a future discussion, but we always appreciate that. But in any case, let me go ahead and boot up my recorders here, so I think we'll just get straight into it. All right, give those a second to boot up there. Okay, Anne, are you ready there?
I am.
Okay, let me go ahead and hit record. There we go. So, as usual, we'll leave a little bit of a pause and then I'll do my introductions. Let me make sure my notes are up here so that we have something to go through there. All right, so just leave a little bit of a pause and we'll go from there. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And in our continuing series of Pokemon side game music discussions, we've reached the final Gen 5 side game, and that happens to be Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity for the 3DS. So this game has, I guess you could say, something of an interesting reputation. First of all, there's only one of them instead of two or even three as we've seen before. And this one tends not to be as highly regarded as the other ones, but we'll talk more about that in the game discussion. In any case, as far as when this released, it was either a late 2012 or early 2013 game, depending on where you're from. In Japan, it launched in November of 2012. In North America, it launched in March of 2013, and then in Europe and Australia, it launched in May of 2013, basically a day apart. And I think, as usual, you have a little bit of a disadvantage here. You don't have a ton of experience hands-on with this game, but you have played it a little bit and done a fair bit of digging. Do you want to summarize some of that for us?
Yeah, mostly a lot of digging, just because, like many of the Mystery Dungeon series, like I kind of never got super into them, so like I've missed a lot over the years. So I had to kind of dig up a lot of Let's Plays, but I was able to play. I believe I've played some of this in the past. Some of it looks very familiar, although I might be conflating this with other Mystery Dungeon games that I may have played at like a con in the game center or something. But I was able to find someone at my local game shop who had it and who kind of brought it by and let me play it for a little bit to kind of just get a bit of a feel. I didn't make it very far, but yeah, they definitely, well, we'll talk about that when we get to the actual gameplay.
Yeah, 1 second here. And for some reason, let's see, you don't seem to be...
Am I not coming through?
I can hear you, but you're not registering on my recorder for some reason.
Oh, shoot.
I'm not sure what's going on there, so 1 second here, let me...
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Okay, and go ahead and talk a little bit more.
Yeah, this is what life is like behind the scenes when you're making a podcast. Things very often go wrong. But we're doing our best, and we hope you guys have fun listening to us anyway. Thank you for coming.
All right. Yep. I guess I just had the gain so low it wasn't even registering for some reason. That's very strange. In any case, I'll just resume with my sort of discussion of this. Well, mine was a little more... Sorry. Well, my experience was definitely much more firsthand, as it turns out. I actually bought this when it came out. I bought it digitally because that was a thing by the time this came around in 2013 here. I was buying most of my games digitally, actually, at that point. Played through the whole thing. I actually checked on there. It has like over 150, 160 hours on there, so I certainly got a fair amount of time into this game. I did play it a little bit just recently within the last week or so, which was actually kind of a bit of a problem because the battery on my new Nintendo 3DS doesn't seem to hold much of a charge anymore for some reason. So I've actually had it die on me a few times during play sessions before I could even plug it in. It's that strange there. So if I want to do more 3DS stuff, I'm going to have to actually toss that or get a replacement battery somewhere. But definitely enjoyed it a fair bit both then and now. So like the other Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, this was produced by Spike Chunsoft. And we have two different musicians on this one. One of them is returning, Keisuke Ito. I hope I got that kind of sort of right. He was on, I don't think the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, but he was definitely on the Explorers series. He may have only come in for Explorers of Sky, but in any case, his credits include Yakuza 3, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, Smash Ultimate. He created the themes for two of the boss characters in there, Galeem and Darkon. And did you have anything to add on that particular one?
Not super. Kind of his IMDb is kind of the most that we know about him, although like he does seem to have a bit more of a presence on like say social media and the like than some of the others before.
Okay, well, we do have a new name on here as well, Yasuhiro Kawagoe. Hopefully, like I said, I'm never great with these Japanese names, and is always better. But this individual's credits include Attack of the Friday Monsters, World of Final Fantasy, which I guess is a music Final Fantasy game. There's also a Maxima variant of that, I guess a special edition of some sort with probably even more stuff in it. And were you able to dig up anything on this individual?
Yeah, this guy is kind of interesting. Maybe it's just because I know World of Final Fantasy a little better than some of of the other guy's discography, he actually like I haven't found a ton on like his career, but he of all people we've profiled on this show like has like is the most out and open. Like we actually have pictures of him that we can like identify, and seems to do a lot just with blogging and YouTube and the likes that you can kind of chat with him. He'll post sheet music, various projects he's working on. So with more time to dig, I could probably like find more about him. But he seems to be a very open guy as far as the game is supposed to go.
All right, and I want to check one more thing. How are your levels? Do those look okay? You came through, but you were kind of. Oh, now you sound a lot better.
Did I come through a little peaky, or?
You were kind of underwater there for a moment. I'm not sure if that was a bandwidth thing or now you sound fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I wish I had a better explanation. I mean, as long as it records okay on your end.
It looks like it is. It's. I mean,
weird.
if it's not, we'll find out in the playback. But.
All right. Well, that's.
Maybe
like I said, that's one reason we do this live, and you get to experience some of our own. This year, so apologies for that. The final edited version is, of course, always nice and clean there. All right, well, let's see. Our next thing we talk about, that's the overall style. Okay, well, as far as the overall style of this, now, the previous games were on Game Boy Advance and the original DS. The 3DS is honestly kind of a much more technically capable system. We talked about it a little bit in our Pokemon Rumble Blast discussion a little ways back. But I think sort of stylistically, this one is like it's not a complete departure. There's still that Celtic influence that is in pretty much all the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. But I think this one goes in a bit more of an orchestral direction with a lot of its stuff, or at least it's easier for it to get that across. And do you think that's a fair statement?
I would agree. Like you can really tell that if they're not like recording an actual symphony orchestra, that these instruments are so much higher fidelity. Like if they're using MIDI instruments, like it sounds so much better. It sounds so much more realistic, and it's easier to pick out the variety of harmonics, I guess, just the variety of different sounds within the different instruments. And it doesn't feel like it all blends together. It doesn't feel like it all kind of is coming out in a tinny sort of computery way. So, like, yeah, you can definitely see the glow up.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, much higher fidelity and a little bit of a different direction. We'll talk more about that, I think, after we finish talking about all the songs we've picked out. But as we usually do, each of us have picked out 3 songs. And what did you pick out?
Yes, I picked out Skydiving. I picked out Hope, the light version 1, and Till the Very End.
Yeah, now just so folks know, there is an unlockable sound test in this game that you can get in the post-game. It requires a fair bit of rigmarole. But 2 of Anne's tracks, the Skydiving and the Till the Very End, are not part of that. You can find them online, but I don't believe they're actually part of that. And a note about Hope light arrangement, I think I've seen some places that get that swap between version 1 and version 2.
Ah.
So a little bit of some tricky stuff here, even though we ostensibly have an official track list for this game. Doesn't quite work out perfectly. In any event, though, my 3 tracks... My 3 tracks are the Inflora Forest, Kilionea Road, not sure on the pronunciation on that, and then Whole Hills. So you've ordered these a little bit out of in-game order just so that I don't have 3 in a row. But in our playlist that we have here, the first one is one of Anne's picks. It's Skydiving. This is, I think, near the very beginning of the game as your character is being put into the Mystery Dungeon world. As usual, you're a human being turned into a Pokemon in this game. And what sort of caught your attention with this one?
Yeah, so even though this track is incredibly short, I did want to talk about it just because it took me by surprise. Like it subverted my expectations a bit. So it starts out soft and shimmery and then has these delicate little arpeggios. And it just the title of this game is Gates to Infinity. And there is something very mystical, very otherworldly, very like beyond the veil of time about this track. I perfectly feel like I'm dropping into a magical world. It doesn't have kind of like the pomp and the fanfare and the lower harmonics that I would normally associate with like the beginning of the game or the call to adventure. It has a more subtle sense of wonder. And like I said, just took me by surprise. And I feel like that's a very mystery dungeon thing to do, to kind of be more than what you expected, or to come at things in with a different emotion than what you might expect from, you know, the game, how it looks. So
Yeah, I definitely noticed that shimmer right at the start of the track, and then of course it's called skydiving, and there is a sensation of falling towards, I guess, well, the earth, I guess, more or less there. So it does kind of capture that. It's not quite the same thing. Well, I mean, it's really not the only game where there's a falling mechanic for your main character. I forget if some of the other Mystery Dungeon games do it, but Legends Arceus has that sort of mechanic in there. Not quite the same, and not quite the sky battles would be in the X and Y games either, but definitely a falling mechanic. And also the Guardian Signs, the third Ranger game, also has a falling mechanic. So definitely some stylistic through lines if you compare to some of those other musical pieces from there.
yeah, definitely.
All right, well, and let's just go on straight to your next pick. This is Hope Light Arrangement 1. Now, like we said earlier, some places do kind of swap these. I think the Sound Test has the version 2 listed before version 1, which I think is what messes people up.
Okay.
This is I believe, the more sparse arrangement of this theme. Is that correct?
I think I'll describe it. It's very similar to skydiving in that it's soft and shimmery, and it's like feels like it's only a couple of synth instruments, even though they are arpeggiating in a very energetic way, but it like very delicate little bell sounds. So yeah, it to me it feels sparse in the sense that there are not as many instruments as many of the other tracks. But I picked it because I am a sucker for soft, delicate bell shimmery sounds, and that is what this track is. It's kind of interesting in that it feels very repetitive for a long time until you realize that there are these low hums underneath and like lower notes being played. And it takes like forever to get into the track before you realize like there actually are other instruments here. And it's very interesting because it almost, once those lower tones start coming in, it starts to become very soothing and warm and truly moving. But it takes a very long time to get there. Like you almost start to wonder, why does this loop need to be so long? And I wonder if maybe it could have been mixed better, or if the scene it plays under is that long and that's deliberate, that by the time you really start to realize that it's not your imagination, there is like an oboe or a woodwind playing, that something in the scene narratively changes. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess, Anne, you're at a bit of a disadvantage, although you have a
Yeah.
fair amount of, well, you have a very small amount of direct experience, and you have looked at other stuff there, but pinpointing, like, I believe this is a cutscene song,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, can be a little bit difficult. The one thing I definitely noticed structurally is this is almost certainly in 3/4 time. We talked about that a lot with the Explorers game, because we found that correlates well with the sense of time, and of course there's time travel in that one. Not in this one. This is definitely more of a space-based traveling type game. But I did want to point that out. And in fact, a lot of the plot-related songs in this game seem to have 3/4 time, as well as a little bit of a motif that comes back in a lot of them. Anything else you wanted to say about this track, Anne?
Well, I didn't actually notice it was in 3/4 time until you brought it up, but now I hear it because 4/4 can feel very grounding. It's like a heartbeat, but there's a quality to 3/4 time music that like almost feels a little ungrounded or a little airy, a little waltz like. So I'm glad you brought that up because like that there's definitely a quality in this track that feels not ungrounded necessarily, but like yeah, just a little bit different in its beat.
All right, well, let's move on to one of my picks. In case folks hadn't noticed, I actually, for some reason, ended up picking all dungeon themes, and Anne picked other stuff, which is just fine, but I just want to kind of point that out. I'm not sure if there's a reason for it, but my first track is the Inflora Forest theme, and this is kind of interesting. It still has a bit of a definite mystery dungeon vibe, but I think as we go on, we're going to point out some differences between this and sort of the previous ones. As far as the instrumentation, it's got some slow woodwinds over most of it, and the percussion track is really just a bunch of little clicks there. I'm not sure exactly what device or instrument would produce that. And what was sort of your first impression of this track?
Yeah, I was impressed by the percussion as well. To me, it sounds like a shaker, or like something to that, some kind of like shaking type percussion. And yeah, that just some woodwinds and the shaker, and it's very sweet in that simplicity until suddenly it's not entirely sweet, and there's some minor chords in there. So another track that plays with your expectations a bit, that just kind of takes you out of your safe comfort zone for a quick second.
And I also noticed very much an up and down quality to a lot of the parts, almost as if maybe there are a lot of birds or other things fluttering by as you're exploring this.
Yeah, a lot of evocative things here.
Yeah, and going back to the style a little bit, one thing we noted with sort of our prior Mystery Dungeon discussions is that there's something of a you're never safe quality. And while there might be some of that here, it's definitely not as present in this soundtrack, and particularly this track, than it was in some of the previous games. We'll probably circle back around to that when we do our overall opinions on it, but I wanted to sort of set the seeds for that right now.
Yeah, a little bit, but not a
ton. All right, so the next one, like I said, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right. Kilionea Road. We're not, like I said, entirely sure. If that's a cultural reference somewhere, we'd love to hear about it. You can always drop us a comment. The one not entirely dissimilar, but it has a different instrument balance. I noticed bells, chimes, woodwinds, and strings on this one. And it actually has a bit of a march quality. Did you notice that as well, Anne?
I did, yeah. Especially when it starts out, because there's a grand quality with the brass section coming in spurts. And then later the woodwinds come in for some emotion and this soft delicacy. And like there's a very folksy quality to it at some points. Like I really like the variety that's contained in this one track. And as always, I'm a sucker for the delicate bells, which feature prominently in this track as well.
Yeah. Also, it does kind of feel like there's an area-to-area progression there, that you're going to different places that have slightly different, like, themes or whatever you want to say, or instrumentations to them. Definitely got that feeling as you listen to the piece. And then as far as the vibe, it's, like I said, going back to what we said about the previous one, about this not being maybe as dangerous sounding as prior Mystery Dungeon games, very warm and mysterious quality. So definitely some you don't know what to expect in there, but maybe not as dark as some of the other stuff there. Anything else you noticed about this one, Anne?
Just kind of like the overall, like I think this track, since it has, as you say, a place to place sort of feel, like there's a lot of different sections, I think if I had a second chance to make this track, I would have stretched out the loop a little longer just to kind of enjoy each little section a little more. But yeah, it's just a lot of variety, and I appreciate that.
You know, the sectionality kind of reminds me actually a little bit of the overworld theme from Shadows of Almia. Not melodically speaking, but structurally, a little bit of the overworld theme there in that particular game, which has a lot of sort of little sections in it, which are distinct. Okay, well, Anne, looks like you picked out another cutscene theme here. This is Till the Very End. What sort of... let's see, I want to pick a different intro here. I always try to do that with different ones to make it a little give it a little variety. What was it about this one that grabbed you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I didn't get the chance to play this game in full, so I don't know fully well the plot, but this track just felt like it had so much storytelling to it. I was pretty sure it was a cutscene. Steven, just sounds like I was right to think that. But the track is very melodic. It seems full of sadness and with a little bit of a callback to the Hope track I picked earlier, to give kind of some bittersweetness to it. It's a track that I feel like if I were playing this game and, became emotionally invested in the characters, that it would probably make me cry. So I picked it because I felt like it must have emotional resonance to the story. And I think it's kind of representative of the musical direction of this entire game, in that there's not a ton going on. Like even though there probably are actually many instruments, it feels like there's not a lot. It feels like it's just this piano or synth bell situation over top of some winds, and it's just so very sad.
Yeah, it's all what I like to call the Gates to Infinity theme. I'm sure most folks are familiar with the Mystery Dungeon theme, but this game itself also has a recurring motif that seems to be specific. It might be the friendship theme or whatever, but there is a definite use of that here, and I think that's one of the things that makes this very interesting and memorable as it occurs towards the end of the main game storyline. All right, well, one more dungeon theme. This is my third pick. This is Whole Hills. And long before we got to this game, I knew this was one I wanted to pick out because I think there are other songs in this soundtrack that do some kind of similar things in here, but this one I think does it possibly the best. So if you listen to this track, it's associated with the dungeon of the same name. It's actually kind of an important plot dungeon. I think it's where your partner gets taken hostage or whatever in there. I believe is around this time. But when it starts out, kind of have an unassuming start there. There's some low horns and almost like you're kind of looking around a place or something like that. And it does a kind of a gradual build. And then, I'm not sure exactly how far in terms of time, it changes, definitely changes. And I assume that when you listen to this, you'd certainly notice some of that.
Yeah.
What was your reaction?
Oh, this is just a very cool track. Like, as you say, it seems to build, and then like some very Celtic-y or folky motifs come in and just pull you to a place. I don't know how to explain the sound I'm hearing other than I feel like something has grasped me and pulled me. But yeah, it's so very it's dramatic, but not in an overpowering sense. It's got a little flute overtone, and it just you definitely feel a sense of something important, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah. So sort of to elaborate, like I said, it's kind of understated at the very beginning, slowly builds, and then all of a sudden there's this sound, and I'm not even really sure how to describe it. If you've heard it, right. You've heard it, and you know what it sounds like. there's actually like an alternate version of this track as well called Illusory Whole Hills or stuff like that that has a little bit different. But after that sound, some idea of what that is. It goes into this absolutely lush instrumentation for like 20, 30 seconds that is absolutely just wonderful. This track is one when I did back in 2019 when I did the special Pokemon episode to coincide with Detective Pikachu for the local low power radio station. This is one of the songs I picked out just because it is so neat and just so memorable because of that. Like I said, you just start listening to it, you may not think too much of it, and then it just hits you so hard there. And that's one reason I picked it out. And also a track, like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we got this in here. And kind of want to have it towards the end here. All right, well, like with the other Mystery Dungeon games, there's over 100 tracks in this game. Not terribly atypical for a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game to have a very large soundtrack. Like I said, there is a way to unlock the sound test, which requires a bit of effort in the post game. But some other things I considered using the second phase of the final boss, as well as a couple of other dungeon themes primarily, as well as a track called Magnagate, I think is how it's pronounced. But A Friend's Decision is also a great track in there. There's a lot to choose from, as there always is with these. So, and I assume you had a similar sentiment where you had to try to pick. Like I had some clear leaders, I think, with this one. There was a lot of strong contenders. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I was every time there was a dungeon track, all of them are solid. I was also really intrigued by a lot of the kind of the road themes, like just because a lot of them felt like we talked about with some of the tracks, you picked like a variety. So like it really felt like you were exploring different areas of a place. Like they really did put a lot of work into this this album overall, the game music, and all of it, like all of the there's so many good tracks here, and they all feel like they connect to the overall musical vision, and yet there's enough distinctness that it's very hard to pick some favorites.
Yeah, so not at a loss for choices. We have quite the opposite problem, as is usually the case with Mystery Dungeon, so not too surprising there. As far as overall opinions on this, I've mentioned this here and there. Some of the earlier Mystery Dungeon games, I think, have more of a you never know what's going to pop out quality, and there is some of that in some of the themes here. But I think this actually has a soundtrack that is, we had said more orchestral, and part of that was just the higher fidelity of the 3DS versus the original DS and certainly the GBA. But I think it's also very much a friendlier soundtrack, like the Inflora Forest and some of the other things there. It's more of a going on an adventure quality than something could go out and get you at any time, even though mechanically that's still true. And was that sort of your conclusion as well, or?
Yeah, I think so. It's like having not played them fully, it's kind of hard to cast a judgment about that. But I definitely, I feel in some ways this game maybe mechanically, in the sense of like the ease of gameplay, maybe is a little less. But in terms of say like overall graphics and like just overall presentation, it kind of is comparable to the soundtrack, and kind of like it took a level up and took advantage of a lot of the DS capabilities. Am I understanding your question?
So I guess what I was trying to say is the music doesn't sound like. I mean, it's either way. It's kind of a game aimed at a younger audience, so it's not super threatening and dark. But what I mean is, I think this entry, has a friendlier vibe to its music than the prior Mystery Dungeon games. If that makes sense.
Okay, sorry, I must have misheard you. It was a little warbly earlier.
That's okay.
Yes, actually, yeah, I think you're right. just because it doesn't, as you were saying earlier, there's not as much of a sense of like you can never fully relax. There's always some minor chord going off in the background or something to agitate you. This soundtrack does seem to have more of a sense of wonder and beauty to it, more often than it has a sense of unsettling battle fervor. Is that what you meant by mechanically?
Yeah, it sort of, I think, kind of reflects that. Still feels definitely like Mystery Dungeon music, despite kind of the new person and sort of, it doesn't have any of the people who worked on like the Red and Blue Rescue Team originally. None of those folks are on this particular game, so that partially probably explains the shift. But it still does feel like Mystery Dungeon, first of all, in terms of production, like production value and whatnot. And I was extremely impressed with all that, as usual. And like I said, I think it went in more of an orchestral direction than you could on the DS. Not that there aren't, things of that fidelity that are clearly mimicking an orchestral sound, but I think they went maybe more cinematic as well with a lot of the stuff here, almost as if they wanted to have, like, is there some Mystery Dungeon movie that got canned and this music is the result?
If only. But yeah, definitely.
Maybe someday they'll do that.
Definitely the capabilities of the 3DS, I think, they took advantage of the fact that you can have music sound really good comparatively to some of the previous platforms. Because this game does sound very beautiful.
All right. Well, if you have any thoughts, any tracks you thought we missed, like I said, we could never get to all the ones we would like to on a game like this. But you can always give us a comment. If you're watching these on video, go ahead and give us a comment there. Otherwise, drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or @pokepress on Twitter. And speaking of Twitter, for our feedback section this time, I've got a little bit of a presentation of a recent Twitter conversation I had. All right, so I kind of have a feeling in our game discussion we're going to have some not nice things to say about social media, so I did want to provide a bit of a counterexample. This is a little discussion I had recently with someone who, we don't quite agree on everything, but I think we were able to find some common ground, and I kind of want to point that out. So this is a Twitter user called Comic Book Clay, @BeastRider4, if you're interested in their handle. So right now what I have up on the screen is a tweet they put out where they had just watched Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. Yeah, Mewtwo Strikes Back is that piece of the franchise that I always find interesting to talk to people about, whether it's the 98 Japanese version, the 99 dub, or the remake that came out a few years ago. But he, I believe it's a he, is really advocating for a similar CGI remake of Pokémon 2000, which I'm not totally opposed to, despite my kind of mediocre opinion of Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. So I kind of replied to him on this one. Let's see, I pointed out that if you want to get an idea of what that might look like, there is a Lugia in the Post Malone virtual concert, and there's a CGI Articuno in a video on like the Pokemon Kids channel. That's a music video for Winter Wonderland. I did kind of warn him, you might want to be a little careful that, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, they didn't have much of the music from the 99 dub, which I think disappointed some folks. And I know we've kind of, especially in our, after the recording and in some of our other stuff, talked about Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution kind of to death. We only spent, 3 hours of time on it when it originally came out. But I think we were talking about this before we started this discussion today, and you said that the music changes didn't bother you that much, but I think we're kind of in agreement that they have less flexibility if they ever do a remake of Pokemon 2000 in terms of what music they quote unquote need to bring over.
Yeah, I'm somewhat starting to change my mind on that. To that, I would like to thank you, Comic Book Play, because up to this point, I have been very much not wanting them to do a Pokemon 2000 remake, just because I feel that some movies, some pieces of art are perfect for the media they were created in, and while nothing they do will take away from my childhood experience, like that movie will always exist in the medium it was created in. Like I haven't always felt we don't need it. But when you bring up singing the fight between the three legendary birds and Lugia, and I think of how simplistic and the beauty of the color that the Gen 1 and some Gen 2 Pokemon were in their design, and the beauty of that color palette, you make me think that yes, a fight like those specific graphics and a fight between those three birds, if they got some really good people in charge of their lighting and their color design, we could have something very beautiful. So I would like to thank you for turning me around on that thought. I definitely think that like Lugia's song, like whatever copyright lawyers you have to do to get that, you got to get that. But because otherwise, like we cannot recreate that magic again. But I actually, because I often dislike remakes that try to do the exact same thing, which is one of my huge issues with Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolutions, is that it's basically a shot for shot. A lot of the Disney live action remakes are kind of the same thing. It's like, I'm more interested when you do something different. And as much as like, I feel that the Donna Summer's The Power of One song is like entrenched in our hearts, the part of me that realizes that is never going to go away from the world, it will always be here with us. I want to see them do something different with Pokemon 2000. I want to see something new, and to that effect, a brand new credit song. I would be on board with that. I know Steven is not, but I think it would be worth it.
Part of our disagreement here is somewhat personal preference, but I think
Indeed.
like part of it is, I think, also like how much money would they be leaving on the table in terms of people wanting to stream the song and also watch the movie, especially if it gets like a theatrical release. I am somewhat open to the idea, which we talk about a little bit later in this thread, about having someone else sing it. I also point out in this thread here on Twitter, not to be confused with a certain new Facebook feature that was just introduced when we recorded this, that with Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, they were able to sort of get away with doing a different in-song, in part because instead of doing an Ash Pikachu song, like We're a Miracle, they were able to do Keep Evolving, which is a legitimately good song. Don't get me wrong on that one. But because that is a song that is clearly about Mewtwo, they were able to kind of shift things. With The Power of One, I have no idea where they would go elsewhere with that besides writing a different song about the same thing, which I don't think would be received particularly well. I don't think a bad remake of Pokemon 2000 would bankrupt the Pokemon Company, or have people, come with pitchforks and torches outside their headquarters and burn it down or something like that. That's not going to happen. But from a why even bother standpoint, And I guess the other thing I should mention about Lugia's theme in this movie is that there are slightly different, there are different themes based on in the Japanese and English versions. The one you're most familiar with and the one that seems to get the most covers is the English version composed by the late Ralph Schuckett. So it's not just Donna Summer's estate they would have to potentially work with, depending on what they decide to do. I'm fine with them experimenting and creating some other new songs for it, and whatnot. But I think that, musically that foundation, for commercial purposes, if they want to do some, an alternate language track with the Japanese score and Japanese voice actors and whatnot, or do alternative showings, which they do in theaters nowadays. For digital events, they'll do like a dubbed showing and a subbed showing for a lot of movies. If they want to do that, I'm all for it. But I think the primary version, that was one of my problems with Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. There are definite arguments that the 99 dub, may have obscured certain facets of the 98 Japanese version, but I'm not sure that spending millions of dollars is the best way to rectify that problem on a remake like that. Is sort of the way I think about it. You'll find that I have more of a what would this look like from the Pokemon Company's perspective, from a financial perspective, maybe than some other folks. But in any case, Comic Book Clay did kind of come around that maybe they should just do The Power of One with a new singer. I have some ideas. They would get volunteers, for sure. Donna Summer's a hard act to live up to, but they would get volunteers. I don't know. And on that note, are there any people you would be interested in, assuming they are doing a new version, however they're rearranging it or reworking it or however for The Power of One, is there an artist you think would be a good choice for that?
Gosh. Is Beyonce too big for Pokemon? But I don't know. There are so many great artists. Somebody who definitely had a lot of soul, I think, and who could really deliver the emotion and the tenderness and could make that song relate to every single character. I don't know if I can think of anyone in specific, but I think there are many wonderfully talented singers who could pull it off. And I think, as you said earlier, it kind of all comes down to personal preference and kind of what you personally think is the most important storytelling aspect to focus on, and whether or not you think it's worth the money, and what the lawyers can pull off money wise too. So I think what Comic Book Play has pointed out here is that already just the three of us, we have three slightly different perspectives on what we think would be the greatest choice, which means that there is an incredibly wonderful board meeting probably happening right now, or will happen if they ever decide to do this movie, a remake, that I would love to be a part of, because there is so much to debate and so much to decide artistically about music, about graphics, about, do we use the same song? Do we not use the same song? Do we get a different singer? Which singer do we get? That everybody is going to have a different idea, because Pokemon, The Power of One, touched all of us in so many different ways. And it's hard to say who is right or wrong, but there's definitely a lot of feelings about this movie and its visuals and its music and its story.
Yeah, definitely a lot to talk about there. The other reason they might be thinking about this now, even if they set it aside earlier, is obviously this is 2023, and there was a very successful video game movie earlier this year, and this is something we don't really know what they're doing on the animated side for movies going forward, but this is something that would, conceptually, at least theoretically, take less to get the ball rolling, than creating an entirely new movie from scratch, because they would have a template to work from.
Well, either way, thank you, Comic Book Clay, for inspiring me to rethink a few things about my initial disdain for a remake of 2000. Now I have, I'm warming up to some possibilities.
Yeah. So the one thing he said, he wanted to see the CGI stuff. I mentioned to him in a thing that you're not seeing in this presentation here, that I wasn't as impressed with the CGI. There are parts of it that are very good, like, say, the interior of the Viridian City gym is fantastic in Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. But kind of personally, I think there's a lot to work on if they want to do a full-fledged motion picture, especially one that might be released theatrically. But thanks to modern technology, you won't be able to see this if you're listening to this on audio, but I'll try and put a link in the episode description. I use the wonderful magic that is generative AI, specifically Stable Diffusion, to create to take a still from Pokemon 2000, the hand-drawn animated version, and using a model trained on sort of recent CGI Disney movies, not Pixar, but Disney movies, as well as a custom embedding I created with screenshots from Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. I came up with something that might give us an idea of what this could look like. And if you're watching this live, you can now see that there. I did watermark it just to make sure no one tries to put it out there as confirmation, proof positive that they're working on a remake of The Power of One. But you can see in this picture we have Articuno shooting an ice beam out, and then in the back you can see Moltres. Not a lot of body features there, but you can see the wings and the flamethrower coming out of its mouth, and then you can see a little bit of the wing of Zapdos in the top right. And I've been foisting these AI-generated images on you a fair bit over the last 6 or 8 months, usually in a pre-show before these discussions. This is the first time I've brought it into one of these. For the folks at home, what are your kind of thoughts on this image?
I think it's very, this is a really good, pitch meeting type of image to get people, really super into it. I think it really showcases also the strength of that movie's design sense. I feel like to really capture it, I would make the color, I would change some things with the coloring. That's what I was saying earlier. To do this, I would hope they got a really good lighting director and colorist, because the design, the lines, the colors were all very crisp and simple, and the lighting was perfect. The art design on Pokemon 2000 is bulletproof. And I feel like this kind of gets very close to getting that spirit, that use of light, the clouds in the background, the somewhat muted background, but with grays and whites, but bright, bold colors. I feel this is getting very close to that visual design that took our breath away back in the day.
Yeah, so like I said, if you're listening to this on audio, I'll include a link of some sort to my tweet or the thread or whatever. But not opposed to a CGI remake of Pokemon 2000 or even some of the other movies. I just, want to make sure folks recognize there are a lot of potentials with it, as with any movie. But especially when folks have expectations. You can't please everybody, but you can try and find a happy medium. All right. Well, we said this is the last. Gates to Infinity is the last Gen 5 side game. We actually did kind of skip a couple, like the typing game and Dream Radar and whatnot. Pokédex 3D. We did skip those. So that's one reason we got to this end of this generation relatively quickly. But before we start the XY Gen 6 side games, as usual, we're going to have a little bit of a spacer in between. And we've decided for this one, what we're going to do is, what's the best official version of the English Pokemon theme? So sometimes referred to as Gotta Catch 'Em All. This is the theme that started out as part of the as the opening theme of the first season of the dub of the anime. Many localized versions, but we're going to be talking about the best, what we think are some of the best official versions, and sort of come to some sort of conclusion. I have a feeling the original TV show version might come out at number one. I think has a pretty good shot there. But we'll also including stuff most likely like the Billy Crawford first movie version, the version from Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions, perhaps the XY version. And there's a few others out there that are official and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I think the way it's going to work is Anne and I are probably going to narrow it down to a list of about 5 or 6 candidates. We're going to go over those, say about what each of them does, and we're going to try and work our way there. Anne, I assume you're pretty excited for this one.
I am. I'm a little nervous because I know that this is all personal preference, basically. So we are not going to agree, and I hope everyone listening at home understands that. You will also probably not agree with us, but there is going to be so much to talk about because each of these does different things very, very well, and it's a song that we all love in many of its forms.
Yeah, so pretty malleable tune. I think we'll have some interesting things to say about the different versions and how they sort of twist it around each time.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. All right, so as usual, we're going to do a game discussion.
Yes.
So, oh, interesting. Cody, glad you could make it. I think that's,
Hi.
glad you could make it there. So we post that one up. Yeah, so it is an interesting concept. Like I said, far away. Like I would hope that Oriental Light and Magic, especially with, I'm sure they got a lot of experience, even if they weren't able. Like I'm sure that with Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, what probably happened is that they just ran out of time and budget to do everything they wanted, even in the Japanese version. You know, they had to get it done by, sometime in 2019, they had to get it out there. And, likewise for the dub and stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some definite cost overruns, and I wouldn't be surprised if some stuff maybe they had intended to do some extra stuff for the localization to better accommodate that, and maybe that some of that fell by the wayside. That might explain stuff like why the short Pikachu's Vacation wasn't remade, why the Amber scene, both of those would require additional sets to be built in CG, effectively speaking. They would need to create the place for the short. They would need to create that sort of dream world for the Amber 2 scene, as well as models for, Amber herself and all that other stuff, and the baby Mewtwo and whatnot. That would require a lot of... that's non-trivial. Not that the added scenes or the added cut, stuff there wasn't completely free, but it was, kind of, but that was probably easier as long as they didn't have to make additional models and whatnot. So, like I said, potentially could work out quite well, but a lot to learn. I'm sure they did some for anything, either Pokemon and or Netflix, because I'm sure Netflix does post interviews, exit interviews basically for, or post release interviews for a lot of their big ticket items, which I'm sure Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution probably was. Given the amount of attention it got, they probably did some focus group testing afterwards to see, would people be interested in a Pokemon 2000 remake? What would we have to change? What would we have to do better? Whatnot. All right, but let's do what we're really here for, which is to talk about the game itself. Now, as I remember, like I said, we'll leave a little pause here, but just a little framing here. I don't know if it's technically the least well-selling, because there's those Japanese-only WiiWare titles that they put out, and I think those are probably the lowest-selling since they were region-exclusive. They're also, from what I understand, not the best versions, but this one is I think at the time had a fair number of criticisms levied at it. But let's leave a little pause here, and then I'll do our introduction for our game segment. Okay, well, the music definitely holds up, but I know that a number of folks have some criticisms of Gates to Infinity and its gameplay and mechanics relative to the other Mystery Dungeon games. First of all, I think one of the criticisms with this is sort of there's not a personality quiz like there is with most of the other Mystery Dungeon games. Usually you take a bunch of questions that give you like two different answers, not necessarily yes, no, but like two options in a given situation, and based on that, it will assign a Pokemon to you. And this one does not do that. Now, part of the reason for that is there's only 5 choices for you and your partner for this game. There's only the 3 starters from Black and White, Axew, and Pikachu. And that's all you've got to work with. Would that have bothered you, Anne? In later games, they give you like both options. You can either select directly or do the personality quiz. In Super Mystery Dungeon and Mystery Dungeon DX both have that. But I don't know, Anne, how much, if you had done a full playthrough of this, do you think that would have bothered you a lot, or?
Honestly, no, just because I'm used to only picking 3 starters for the main games. I mean, it deviates a little bit from maybe previous mystery dungeons a bit, but I don't think it would have bothered me. It's kind of just, if that's how they present my choices, then that's my choices.
Yeah, I suppose it's a little disappointing, but I wouldn't call it, a deal breaker or anything like that. But it was definitely brought up there. Now, another thing about this is that you'll notice the dungeons are not particularly long. Yes, in the post game there are a couple of those classic 99 floor dungeons, but most of the ones in game, even major story dungeons, tend to be 10 or fewer floors in there. Like in the other games, you'll get into the double digits even relatively early in terms of number of floors. Mm-hmm. Now, before we talk too much about that, I suspect the reason for this might actually be, and you had a 3DS, you know that certain games would tell you every so often to take a break and set the thing down. And I think that might be part of the reason why the dungeons here are shorter. That might kind of explain that. But I don't know. How do you feel about all that? Do you think that might be the reason? How long do you think the dungeons should be?
I mean, I didn't think about it at all until you brought it up, and now suddenly I'm having a flood of buried memories. Yes, this was the era of our lives where we were suddenly very concerned with how our children were staring at tiny little screens all the time, and possible side effects that could have for our eyesight or our headaches or whatever. And to be fair, I suffer from headaches terribly, so maybe it was good on them. But yeah, now that I think about it, yeah, maybe that was a factor in making the dungeons shorter. Of hey, let's this is a concern. Let's try it. I don't know. I think since I didn't do a full playthrough, so it's harder for me to say. But since one of the main criticisms of this game is it's very repetitive, it's you have to slog through a lot of stuff to get to the meat of the plot. Maybe it would have been worth making the dungeons a little longer with slightly more to do. But at that point, you're talking go back to the drawing board. Let's revamp a lot of things. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole take a break thing, that goes back to at least the Nintendo Virtual Boy, Nintendo's previous 3D system. That had an automatic timer thing where at certain points in the game when it hit a break point, it would tell you, yeah, go take a break for a little bit. And I think that kind of held over to the 3DS. In part because of the stereoscopic 3D screen, which this game does use if you turn it on. Everything is presented in 3D rendered polygons.
And definitely Pokemon as a company cared a lot about that stuff, because I don't know if you watched any of the anime in Japanese, but there was a period of time, years upon years, where at the beginning of the episode, sometimes in the middle of the episode, there would just come this little thing scrolling across the screen telling you, make sure you're in a well-lit area and you're not sitting too close to the screen. So I don't know if maybe the seizure incident has scared the Pokemon company and they're we are going to show that we are taking this seriously. But yeah, I can definitely see that was probably a huge influence.
Yeah, I definitely, one time when I went to an anime night at a local library, they had an anime, which I guess must have been from 97 or 98, that had that little disclaimer at the start of the episode or whatever, coming back from the commercial breaks.
Yeah, but they were still doing it in 2010, so... So I don't know, man.
Well, it looks like it was done hand-drawn cell animation, so I'm assuming it was from the late 90s.
It may have been...
or very early 2000s. Now, we sort of talked about now, as far as some of the 3DS features, it actually does make a lot of use of those. First off, it does use the camera. One thing you can do from the title screen is you can take a picture of a circular object. Well, at least in theory. It's really finicky. I tried it out earlier today, and it took me a lot of tries to get it to actually take me to a dungeon. It sort of ties into the whole Magnagate, or however it's called, system in there. So that's how you get to some additional dungeons that are sort of buried in there. It also uses, the gyroscope features. So there's a mini game where you play a Starmie descending down a tank of water with a bunch of obstacles and treasure chests in it, and your goal is to get, of course, the chest. There you use the 3DS gyroscope to tilt the system to guide the Starmie through that one. And it also uses Street Pass. You can actually save other rescue teams using that, and you'll get a reward for that. I don't know. And I don't suppose you got a chance to try any of those out, did you? Probably not the Street Pass at this point, but...
Yeah, not the Street Pass. I think I did try taking a picture when I was at the game shop. I can't remember what I got for doing that. But, I do love the idea... I love the idea of using all the features of the 3DS, but I like the idea of taking a picture of something in the real world that then impacts your in-game experience. I feel like that was very in at the time in a lot of 3DS games of that, not augmented reality exactly, but that trying to bridge and make use of the camera and kind of utilize its ability to connect to other DSs wirelessly and yeah, I was very, I don't know if I necessarily love the actual mechanic, but I love the ideas behind it.
Yeah, I mean, Pokemon has long had photography, and in part because, obviously there's stuff like Pokemon Snap and its sequel that came out a couple years ago. But there's also stuff I had mentioned to Anne before this. One of other Game Freak's other games is the Game Boy camera. So there's a bit of an angle there. Obviously, Pokemon Go, the whole augmented reality stuff there. So seeing it use the camera here in another Pokemon game, and we'll see it in X and Y as well, a little bit has a camera aspect. I'm not sure. I think it's actually camera shooting within the game itself, not the actual 3DS camera, but you get the idea there of what there is. So not really a surprise to see that come around, but yeah, so I don't think they're super intrusive. I wish the camera one worked better. I'm not sure what the deal is. It does say in a well-lit room, but it seems like I should have been in a place where it was well-lit enough. Could certainly see through the camera there.
Oh, well, I used to use my 3DS camera at cons since I was taking it there to use the Street Pass features anyway. Right. My memory of that camera was it was a little lacking on many fronts.
Well, it's only
it was doing its best, but
only 640 by 480 or whatever on there anyway. All right. Well, mechanically, this game does add a decent number of things. But one of the big ones that shows up in pretty much all the later Mystery Dungeon games is move leveling. So this is where the more times you use a move, that move, regardless of who uses it, will get more power, more accuracy, and other stuff like that, gradually raised level by level as you use it. The higher levels, of course, keep taking longer and longer, but you get the idea. But you definitely see that in Super Mystery Dungeon and Mystery Rescue Team DX. I don't know, Anne, do you have any thoughts on that particular feature?
I'm kind of fascinated by this idea. I'd love to see them find a way to incorporate it into the main series just because, that's real life. If you practice your punching, eventually your jab will get better. So it makes sense. It's kind of weird that it does it for the full team, but I mean, I suppose you got to simplify the game process somewhere or else, it's just too much data. But, I love that idea of, your Pokemon or the Pokemon rather, are practicing their moves and slowly getting better at those specific moves. That's amazing to me. I love that idea. So I'd like to see more of it, I think.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to a degree within the broader universe, not just these games. And another thing you can do is you can also learn a number of additional skills. These are usually retrieved through... some Pokemon will drop treasure chests when you defeat them. You get them opened in town. And occasionally, instead of an actual physical reward, you'll get a skill. And there's actually quite a few useful ones. There's a one that will occasionally pop up and tell you, this way to the staircase to the next floor. When you start a new floor, it'll point you in the right direction. Another one is the danger-seeking skill, which will tell you if there's a monster house on a given floor. And then a couple others tell you how many items tell you if there's a shop, and all that fun stuff. I don't know if you got a chance to use any of those, or well, they're kind of automatic when they do happen.
No, like the features that I believe were unique to this game, like those weren't any of the ones that like really stuck out to me. I may have encountered them, but yeah, like the things that stuck out to me were like the hunger mechanic. I thought that was very fascinating. Where like your Pokemon, if you don't eat, like gets hungry and then it can't recover HP and it starts to lose HP because it's so hungry. And then like also the fact that the ghosts, I don't know if this is true of many other Mystery Dungeon games. Maybe it is, and I just never noticed. But like that the ghosts can walk through wall tiles.
Right.
That's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah, that's a pretty common one throughout the Mystery Dungeon series.
Okay.
The ghost Pokemon can walk through walls. Pokemon that can levitate can go over water and lava, although the latter may burn them. But talking about hunger, actually, most of the dungeons in this game do not use the hunger feature. They do not have your belly implemented there, so you're not going to run out. Now, part of that also might be that they're shorter, so you'd only need to eat once or twice anyway, or to swap your characters around to get through the dungeon anyway. So maybe that's part of it. But that's removed, and that kind of goes on. This is certainly one of the easier Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, which themselves are not the most hardcore roguelikes out there. Ones that have, like if you get knocked out in a dungeon, you'd go all the way back to the beginning of the game, period, you know? Pokemon is obviously not like that in general, and therefore the Mystery Dungeon games based on it aren't either. But I talked about, like, the danger-seeking skill. There's also like a little thing you can build up and that sort of attacks all the Pokemon in a room. So if you do get into a monster house, as long as that's been built up, you can use that to basically work your way out of it without having to use like an item or an attack that affects the entire room or something like that. You can get around there. And a lot of the other skills very helpful. So I would actually say this is probably one of the easier Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games out there. And I think that may have, I don't know, I'm sure some folks want it to be more hardcore. And there is a little bit of that content, but maybe not a ton. None of that stopped me from putting over 100 hours into this game, though. I very much enjoyed my time on it. I don't know. Anne, did you have any thoughts on that particular aspect?
I've just been thinking a lot lately, like listening to kind of other gamers and how they play games, and like kind of reminiscing about how like you want your game to be challenging, but there comes like a certain level of difficulty where it is no longer fun to play. And that can be very different for everybody. Obviously, like there are many people in the gaming community who like have a disability or something where they may struggle to do some things that other gamers do. And like, so I wonder, especially with the Pokemon company's target market being children, if they felt that previous games maybe kind of hit that threshold for some of their audience of like, you know, this game is fun and challenging, but almost a little too challenging sometimes, or if that was just, you know, how it ended up happening. I'm not sure. I definitely don't think it's a detriment that it's too easy. I do think there's a case to be made that it would be neat to add features to increase difficulty if someone wanted them, like say to have like a proud mode version or something. But yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Like, and clearly you enjoyed it a lot despite it being maybe a little less challenging. So what can I say?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that kind of experience. Like, I've run into games where I'm pretty sure I can beat them, but it has ceased being fun to do so. I'd have to either try so many times. One of the more recent examples that a lot of folks might be aware of is Metroid Dread, the 2D game that came out a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. That was one that, like, it wasn't necessarily too difficult for me to beat, but the difficulty got to a point where it was like, it didn't feel like it was worth my time anymore. And I'm sure some folks have felt that way about some of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, especially some of the ones that have harder times. And sometimes depending on who your starter is, like if you pick the Grass starter in the original Rescue Team games, you're going to go up against the legendary birds at some point, and they all have a pretty good advantage over you in that particular case. Some of them on both types there, so that can be a bit of a hard mode, I guess, thing there, but you kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
So I did kind of want to point that out. All right, well, there's still a major aspect of this game we have barely touched on. I think we briefly mentioned it or alluded to it earlier. This game definitely, like all the other Mystery Dungeon games, has a story. I mean, to a certain extent, it's pretty similar to the other ones. You're a human who's been turned into a Pokemon to solve some sort of problem. But sort of the theme of this game is the sort of accumulation of negativity. I kind of alluded to this with talking about social media earlier, but this game came out in late 2012, early 2013, and in some ways may have been ahead of its time. Because, spoiler alert, the final boss of this game, yes, you do fight Kyurem at a certain point with its icy cold heart, but the actual final boss is sort of a manifestation of all the, not necessarily hate, but sort of negative emotion in the world called the Bitter Cold, that you have to fight and break apart as the final boss of the game. Let's see. Okay, you are moving. And it looked like you had stopped in...
sorry.
I thought, wait, did we lose a connection there? No, okay.
No.
Sorry about that. But in any case, it's sort of the personification. And, that might sound kind of corny. Sort of the justification, but a lot of the characters in the game, there's a lot of people who are sort of burnt out and inherently distrustful and stuff like that. And I think that kind of parallels where things have gone in the last 10, 15 years since sort of the rise of social media. Not to say social media is all bad, it isn't. But clearly, as we've seen especially in the last 4 or 5 years, there are some negative implications of it. And this isn't supposed to be all about the perils of social media, but what do you think of the theme of, sort of the manifestation of negativity as a through line for this game?
I think it's very relevant. Social media, it certainly hasn't helped anything, but for me and my personal journey with my emotions, I was 12 when the negativity of the world overwhelmed me to a great degree, and I've been living with depression ever since, and the world has not gotten better, spoiler alert. So this general idea of the negativity will burn out the players, it will overcome the world, it will shove everybody down, and that grief will cause selfishness and cause problems that lead to the end of the world. Those are all things, and there's a thing called the bitter cold, the presence,
right.
That just the name alone feels very real. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on in this game that I feel is so very relevant, and I like that. They kind of save the day, as it were, but there's this thing that I didn't get to experience in the game itself, but I found through the Let's Plays and the research that I did is at the end of the game, when the human player has to return to their world, everybody is so sad and so unhappy. You kind of feel even though we defeated the bad guy, we're still so awful. We still feel terrible. And the partner Pokemon has to kind of overcome their selfishness. As much as I want to take the player Pokemon and bring them back to our world, they'd be going away from all their loved ones and kind of trying to find the balance of wishing the player can just travel between the dimensions, and kind of accepting that they can't be with me all the time, but I still get to see, I don't know, just finding a way to live with the world as it is. There's something very powerful in that too.
Yeah. There's a lot of very interesting things. Spoiler alert in the post game. That's basically what kind of happens there. Is that the your partner will go on a quest to sort of find you or find a path back to you, sort of, and you go through a number of dungeons in the post game like that. But I find it a very interesting take, given that Gen 5. First of all, I think the perceived hatred of it, I think, is very much overblown.
What?
I mean, it's not uncommon for the second generation on the same hardware, meaning the original DS, to sell not as well. We'll see what Scarlet and Violet does. It seems to be doing quite well, but we'll have more of an idea later this year after another quarter or two. Um, but in any case, I think it had the Gen 5 had the disadvantage of being the first generation released in the social media era. Like Diamond and Pearl, social media was still kind of on the horizon. It came out kind of partway through. But this is where you hear all the things in Gen 5, people, specifically about this game. Oh, there's no personality survey. Oh, there aren't that many Pokemon in there. And then you go more generally, it's like, oh, geez, they made a Pokemon out of a candle, out of an ice cream cone, out of a... and it's, that thing. And it's sort of, it was always interesting because I would go to actual events and people would be way nicer in person. Like just as a group, not necessarily individual certain people, but sort of like that. And, outside of Pokemon as well, but it sort of didn't really get better as the decade went on, because you see by the end of it, people are mad at Sword and Shield. It's like, oh, they're not going to have all the Pokemon in there. And then they sell, over 20 million copies. It's like the best thing since at least Gen 2 in terms of sales. And similar stuff with Scarlet and Violet. If you looked on social media, you'd think these were some of the worst games ever. And social media, and when I say that, I mean, pretty much kind of all online media, especially ones that their revenue stream is based on ads, has sort of this feature to it. Like, rather than having a productive, discussion sometimes, or kind of trying to come up with productive ways to either live with something or to improve it, it seems like the best thing they can hope for is, in terms of what does the best, is sort of this inexorable conflict between two or more sides with incompatible worldviews, and that sort of just drives the engine more and more and more. And obviously people have become much more aware of that in the last 4 or 5 years, how that sort of manifests. And I think this game, having an actual physical manifestation of, in the bitter cold, of sort of negativity, is a very interesting take. And I think this, more than maybe any other Pokemon game to a degree, serves as an interesting commentary on its time period. Even though, I don't expect a video game. We talked about Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. I wasn't expecting, no matter how they decided to localize it this time around, I wasn't expecting it to solve the world polarization problem. But I still kind of wanted it to have the, maybe if we thought about what we have in common instead of what's different, well, who knows? That's not quite the moral that comes down through here, but it's sort of it's more of a don't give in type of moral to it. But that's kind of my takeaway from this game. Even though it seems like we're finally now starting to become more and more aware collectively of, how to achieve more useful things. I don't know, and that was a rant. Let's call it what it was. Not an angry rant necessarily, but sort of a lot of words. What are your kind of opinions?
No, I think you're right. Being aware of it certainly, I think, helps a lot with us being able to curb that in ourselves. Because you're right. When social media first came out, it kind of took a lot of the discussions we have naturally to a global scale, but also an impersonal scale. And even with just your friends, it's a very natural instinct when someone is like, oh, you saw that movie, what'd you think about it? You're like, oh, it was great. And then you immediately launch into like your criticisms or something, because we're almost like it's just sort of second nature to us that when we give a review of something or when we talk about something, we talk about it critically, which often means talking about the things we didn't like, the things that didn't work for us. And then we almost seem to like never loop back around to, but these are all the things that I did love. And I think that social media kind of blew that out of proportion, in a way. And like knowing that we do that to ourselves helps us to be like, wow, I've been, even if my intention wasn't to be hateful, I've lately just, talked about only negatives. And like, I didn't realize this until you pointed out, yeah, this is Gen 5. This is Black and White. This is that character N, whose main character trait is that he speaks in entirely negative sentences. He says everything with a negative tense of like, not I like you, but I don't dislike you. Not I feel hopeful. It's like, I don't think it'll suck. Like, and so much of the main series Black and White game is also how we talk to each other when there's conflict, how we treat each other when there's conflict. This was definitely a time in the world where that was a very prevalent thing, and it's no doubt that it inspired Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. And I, again, it was the whole thesis statement of the Gen 5 in general. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And I do love that the thesis statement of this game seems to be like, find a way to live in this world with its grief, with the things you hate, with the negativity. Like, don't give into it. Like, find the positive. And that's really wonderful.
Yeah. Going back to sort of the thing about criticism, of course, the thing that it kind of does with online media is that because of the searchability and whatnot, it's very easy for folks, even if you were trying to do sort of here, I mostly like this, here are a few things they could improve if they go at it again. Like, because of this whole searchability, and, sorry to anyone, well, we've probably all been this person to some degree at some point, where we go in and say, oh yeah, that thing you mentioned, boy, isn't that the worst thing ever, or something like that, or find every video about that topic so you can, I mean, most of us aren't that extreme, but we definitely have been, hit by stuff that, like, almost any topic online, they've done research into all this stuff that, first of all, there does seem to be a negativity bias. That's not uncommon in media, but it seems to be worse with a lot of online media, because having a, pile on for negativity and maybe a somewhat seemingly intractable problem, or having, multiple viewpoints that are irreconcilable, sure is a good way to get people to keep looking at stuff and keep scrolling and keep posting and stuff. So that's the kind of thing. There's also an anti-status quo bias, which is not inherently wrong, but but it can be unproductive. And I think there's also a tendency towards the perpetuation of conflict rather than having a productive conflict where we can come to a compromise that we can at least live with, or find a partial solution or stuff like that. It's like I said, I don't want to make this a huge thing. I would recommend there's a lot of good research out there. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen The Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary. There's a couple other ones on there. There's a lot of books out there. A good one, not for little kids, because it's got some adult language in various places and other stuff, but, what's it called? Todd Rose, Collective Illusions. I think is a good one, especially if you take a look. I did point out to him some of the recent Pokemon games. They sold great. You would not know that from the online discourse. You would think they all flopped horribly for Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet, and I pointed that out to him as a non-political version of it to say, yes, there is an example outside politics where there's an extreme viewpoint that seems very common online, but is in reality, most folks have, at the very least, a more nuanced or more complicated opinion. All right, well, I think that's a lot about that story. Like I said, if you skipped this game because it didn't have a a quiz or something like that, you should at least look through it. And obviously, since the 3DS eShop is now effectively closed, except for like updates and stuff, you're going to need to track down a hard copy or a system that has the game installed if you really want to play it, officially at least. But I kind of recommend you at least look through it. It'll give you some perspective, because even in 2012, 2013, I was getting the sense of this that, yeah, this sort of negativity seems to be, instead of coming to some sort of resolution where we kind of move forward or learn to live with things, it seems like it's more like a snowballing. Boom boom with bitter cold. So some interesting parallels there. But it also, I mean, it ends on a message of hope that this is not something we can't overcome. And I also believe that. It's difficult. You may have to change how you get your information. You may not have to not interact with things. But all right, well, talking about the overall quality of the game, I don't think the plot here, it's not on the same level as like the Explorers games. It's not bad. It's actually quite good. It's quite relevant. I think they did a very good job there. It's presented well. But it's sort of like it's a different type of story than what we got in the Explorers games, and in some of the other Mystery Dungeon, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. Music was fantastic. We could debate about whether it quite reaches the Explorers, series there as well. Obviously, they had a lot more fidelity to work with. The graphics, I mean, this is sort of a preview of what happens with the main series games when those move to 3D. Some people have not been able to let the sprite work go there, and so have similar problems here. Overall, I think, like, say, Explorers of Sky, let's say that's a 10 or a 9 point something. This is a 7 or maybe even an 8. Like, it's got some definite rough edges, things that could be better, things that might be a little too easy. But it is hardly a bad game. And I think, Anne, is that your opinion? Do you have a different take, or?
I agree. It is not a bad game. Like, one of the criticisms that I would agree with was, like, you play through so much content that people find a little bit boring and repetitive until you get to the main plot. And I think with, like, to be fair, like with any game, you either love playing it or you don't. Like, story aside, like the gameplay, it speaks to you or it doesn't. And if you're not like really enjoying it, then it's going to be a lot harder to stick around for the story. And some games balance that really well, some don't. This one maybe didn't, but the game itself is not bad. And like the story is good. The gameplay, some people loved it, some people didn't. But maybe the content versus gameplay ratio could have been tweaked a little, but it's still, that doesn't make it not worth playing, I suppose. And if you really love the Mystery Dungeon series, I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, if we go back to the sort of the dungeon length, at least if they're shorter, then you don't have to fight the same set of Pokemon over and over and over again. You finish it, and then you can go somewhere else or to the next dungeon in the progression and stuff. So there might be some advantages there.
Definitely.
Versus some of the longer dungeons in some of the other games. So it's sort of an interesting balancing act there. So in some ways it might actually be more diverse. That might have been another reason the dungeons are shorter in this game.
True, it might have been an attempt to like address that very problem, yeah.
But yeah, this is another one of those, like, I don't think there are maybe that many people who skipped it just because of the online stuff. Maybe people were a little more susceptible to that than some people are coming out, in the last few years, as far as like being able to parse through online negativity and say, okay, that's a funhouse mirror, or a very distorted lens or something like that to view things through. But in any case, if you did skip this for some reason, I would say give it at least a consideration to go through this. Yes, the gameplay in some of the more recent ones, like Super Mystery Dungeon and the Rescue Team remake, are both more polished. But this is not a bad game by any means. If you like the other Mystery Dungeon games, I think you should at least reconsider this one if you for some reason skipped it.
I agree. There's a lot of good here.
All right. Well, that'll be fun to edit. There was a lot there. A lot. Thank you very much to everyone who came to see this, whether it's live or on replay. Like I said, if you are watching this on replay, please try and give us a comment. We will try and work that into a future discussion in some way, shape, or form. Like I said, our next discussion will be best official version, although it's hard to be definitive, but we will definitely be considering some of the big hitters there. Like I said, I expect to see, obviously, the first season theme from the TV show. The first movie version I expect to be on there. I intend to pick as a nominee one of the version from the Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions concert. I think that's a very interesting version for various reasons. The live nature of it adds something to it.
Born to be a winner definitely needs to be in there, I think. Because it starts
Born to be
out
a winner is a little bit of an interesting case. We'll have to consider what we're going to do.
I feel like it at least gets an honorable mention for having.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about that in our discussion somewhat, just because it is heavily leveraged. And then you got like the XY version, the I Choose You version. I don't think, going back to Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, it's not a terrible version of the song, but it's like a double derivative version. If we take the Mewtwo mix version from that remake, it's like it's a remake of a remake, you know. But and like I said, we're only considering official versions, so sorry, Lindsey Sterling fans, but
but
and maybe someday in the future, I don't know. I Aim to be a Pokemon Master. It's not a bad song. It's a very good song. I consider
there
it to be,
are 1.5 million different official versions.
There are. It's not quite as varied. I don't think they've made it as malleable as or done as much with it as with Gotta Catch 'Em All, the English equivalent. But we might do that someday. Although for that one, I have a pretty clear personal number one answer for it. So yeah, we'll see, and we might do it someday also with the Pokemon main game theme as well. There we have a lot of choices to pick from between, obviously the main series games, but also the TV show, Smash Brothers, stuff like that. And if folks are curious, our next Smash Bros. Discussion for 3DS and Wii U will be after X and Y, I believe, because I think that's when 3DS and Wii U released in 2014. So it'll be after that. It was they have there's like a Lumiose Tower whatever thing stage in there. So definitely some X and Y content. But yeah, I guess I should mention to the folks out there, if you're still watching this, thank you. Some other things we're considering doing for upcoming non-game or movie-specific episodes or stuff like, probably want to do another live music, Pokemon music episode. Excuse me. And also a If Blank did a Pokemon song episode. But we're also considering doing non-Pokemon Game Freak games, other Monster Battler games, and stuff like that. So if any suggestions in any of those areas, please feel free to let us know. We're going to try and get them, especially once we run out of side games in a year or two. Once we're just doing the ones that are coming out, maybe a month or two after they come out, so we can have some time with them. But all right, I think that about covers it. Well, thanks, folks.
Thank you.